My twin brother convinced everyone I was the evil one growing up. At our 30th birthday, I finally exposed his lies. Being born exactly 7 minutes after my twin brother has defined my entire existence in ways I never could have imagined. Those 7 minutes somehow became the foundation for 30 years of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional abuse that nearly destroyed my sense of self. But sometimes the universe has a funny way of serving justice, and karma finally caught up with him in the most spectacular way possible. Growing up, we were inseparable on the surface. People would always comment on how adorable we looked together, how we had that special twin connection. What they didn't see was the intricate web of lies and manipulation that started when we were barely old enough to speak in full sentences. My brother had this incredible ability to twist situations to make himself look like the innocent victim while painting me as the troublemaker, the aggressive one, the problem child. It started small. When we were 5, he broke our grandmother's favorite ceramic bird figurine while we were playing in her living room. I wasn't even in the room when it happened, but somehow when the adults came running, he was crying and pointing at me, claiming I had pushed him into the table. I remember standing there, completely bewildered, trying to explain that I had been in the bathroom, but his tears were so convincing, his story so detailed about how I had gotten angry and shoved him. My grandmother's disappointed look still haunts me. That was the first time I realized my brother had a gift for storytelling, and I was apparently his favorite character to villainize. The pattern continued throughout our childhood. When we were 8, our neighbor's cat went missing. My brother started a rumor that I had been mean to the cat, that I had thrown rocks at it. He told our parents, our teachers, even other kids in the neighborhood. Soon everyone was looking at me like I was some kind of animal abuser. The cat eventually came home on its own after hiding under someone's porch for a week, but the damage was done. I was labeled as the twin with anger issues, the one who couldn't control herself. Middle school was particularly brutal. My brother had mastered the art of subtle manipulation by then. He would do things like pinch me under the dinner table until I would snap and yell at him to stop, but by the time I reacted, he would already have his hands folded innocently on the table. Our parents would only see me seemingly attacking him out of nowhere. He would get sympathy while I got lectures about managing my emotions and learning to be more like my brother, who was so patient and understanding. The worst part was how he would comfort me afterward. He would come to my room later that night, acting like the caring brother, telling me he understood why I got so upset, that he knew I didn't mean to be difficult. It was this twisted cycle where he would create the problem and then position himself as the solution. I started to believe that maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I was just naturally more aggressive, less likable, harder to love. High school brought new opportunities for his manipulation. We were on the same sports teams, had the same friend groups, and he used every opportunity to subtly undermine me. During team activities, he would make small comments that seemed supportive but were designed to make me doubt myself. When I would score a goal or make a good play, he would say things like how proud he was that I finally didn't lose my temper on the field, or how great it was that I was learning to control my competitive nature. These comments made it sound like I had a history of problems that I didn't actually have, but they planted seeds in everyone's minds. He had this way of telling stories about our childhood that painted him as the long-suffering brother who had to deal with my emotional outbursts. He would share these stories at parties or with friends, always with this tone of loving concern, like he was worried about me. People would look at me with pity, like I was some kind of unstable person who was lucky to have such a patient and understanding brother. It was maddening because I couldn't defend myself without seeming like I was proving his point about being difficult. College was supposed to be my escape. We went to different schools, and for the first time in my life, I was meeting people who didn't have preconceived notions about me based on my brother's stories. It was incredible. I discovered that I was actually pretty well liked, that people found me funny and easy to get along with. I started to realize that maybe the problem wasn't me after all. Maybe I wasn't the difficult twin, the angry one, the one with issues. But even from different states, my brother found ways to maintain control over the narrative. He would visit my college occasionally, and somehow during these visits, drama would always unfold. Items would go missing from my dorm room, and he would help me look for them, acting concerned and supportive. Later, I would find out that people had seen me acting suspicious around the time things went missing, or that someone had heard me arguing with my roommate about money or personal belongings. It took me years to realize that he was creating these situations, planting evidence or spreading stories that made me look unreliable or dishonest. The really insidious part was how he would involve our parents in these stories. He would call them, worried about me, saying he had heard concerning things about my behavior at school. Our parents would then call me, not accusingly but with this tone of loving concern that made it clear they believed something was wrong with me. I would try to explain that nothing was happening, that I was doing well, but it just made me sound defensive and like I was hiding something. After college, we both moved back to our hometown temporarily. I was planning to save money and then move to a bigger city, but my brother convinced our parents that I needed family support, that I was struggling more than I was letting on. He painted a picture of me as someone who was barely holding it together, who needed the stability of home and family. Our parents, who just wanted to help, encouraged me to stay longer, to take my time figuring things out. This was when his manipulation reached new heights. He got a job at the same company where I was working, claiming he wanted us to stick together as a family. But once he was there, he started his subtle campaign of making me look incompetent and unreliable. He would volunteer to help me with projects, then create small problems that made it look like I couldn't handle things on my own. He would offer to cover shifts for me when I was sick, then make comments to our supervisors about how I seemed to be struggling with the workload or having personal issues. The breaking point came when I was up for a promotion that I had been working toward for months. I had put in extra hours, taken on additional responsibilities, and received positive feedback from clients and colleagues. But during the final interview process, my supervisor mentioned some concerns about my reliability and emotional stability. When I asked for specifics, it became clear that my brother had been sharing stories about my personal life, about how I had always been the more volatile twin, how our family was worried about me, how he was trying to be supportive but it was challenging. I didn't get the promotion. Instead, they suggested I take some time to work on personal development, maybe consider some professional help for stress management. I was devastated, but more than that, I was angry. For the first time in my life, I was truly angry at my brother, not at myself. I started to see the pattern clearly, to understand how methodical and deliberate his sabotage had been over the years. I began documenting everything. I started keeping a journal of incidents, conversations, and interactions. I reached out to old friends, old teachers, anyone who might remember specific events from our childhood. What I discovered was both validating and heartbreaking. Several people remembered situations differently than they had been told. A few even admitted that they had always felt something was off about the stories they heard, but they hadn't wanted to get involved in family drama. My former college roommate told me something that shook me to my core. She said that during one of my brother's visits, he had asked her detailed questions about my habits, my schedule, my relationships with other people. She thought he was just being a caring brother, but looking back, she realized he was gathering information. She also remembered that after each of his visits, I would have some kind of social problem or conflict with friends, but she had never connected the two things before. I spent months piecing together the full scope of what he had done. It wasn't just childhood pranks or sibling rivalry. It was a systematic campaign to control how people perceived me, to limit my opportunities, to keep me dependent and insecure. He had been stealing my identity in a way, creating a false version of me that everyone believed was real. The hardest part was realizing how it had affected my own self-perception. I had internalized so many of his messages about who I was that I had stopped trusting my own judgment, my own feelings, my own memories. I had spent years apologizing for things I hadn't done, trying to fix personality flaws I didn't actually have, and believing that I was lucky anyone could tolerate me at all. I started seeing a counselor, not because I believed I had the problems my brother had convinced everyone I had, but because I needed help processing the extent of the psychological manipulation I had endured. It was during these sessions that I learned terms like gaslighting and narcissistic abuse. I learned that what had happened to me was not normal sibling rivalry, but a form of emotional abuse that could have lasting effects on my mental health and relationships. As our 30th birthday approached, our parents started planning a big celebration. They wanted to throw a party with all our friends and family, a celebration of their twin children reaching this milestone together. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here they were, celebrating the beautiful bond between their twins, completely unaware that one twin had spent 3 decades systematically destroying the other's life. I knew this party would be another opportunity for my brother to play his role as the good twin, the successful one, the one who had his life together. People would make toasts about what a wonderful person he was, how lucky I was to have such a supportive brother. I would smile and nod and play along with the narrative that had been built around us for 30 years. But something inside me had shifted. I was done being the villain in his story. I was done protecting him from the consequences of his actions. I was done sacrificing my own truth to maintain his carefully constructed image. Update 1. I spent weeks preparing for the party, but not in the way my parents expected. While they were planning decorations and menus, I was gathering evidence. I had started reaching out to people from different periods of our lives, not to gossip or create drama, but to get their perspectives on events I remembered differently than the official family narrative. The responses I got were eye-opening. My third-grade teacher remembered the incident with the broken classroom window. According to my brother's version, which had become family legend, I had thrown a ball too hard during recess and broken the window, then tried to blame him. But when I contacted my teacher, she remembered it completely differently. She said my brother had been the one throwing the ball, that I had been on the other side of the playground, and that she had been confused when I was the one who got in trouble for it. An old family friend told me about something that happened when we were 12. There had been an incident at their house during a sleepover where someone had gone through their daughter's diary and shared embarrassing entries with other kids. I had been blamed for it, and I remembered the shame and confusion I felt when everyone turned against me. But this friend now told me that their daughter had later admitted it was my brother who had found and shared the diary, but by then the damage was done and it seemed easier to just let the original story stand. Even more disturbing was what I learned from my high school guidance counselor, who I tracked down through social media. She remembered me well, she said, because she had been concerned about the reports she was getting about my behavior from my brother and parents, but when she observed me directly, I seemed like a completely normal, well-adjusted teenager. She had always wondered about the disconnect between what she was told about me and what she witnessed herself. The most shocking revelation came from my college friend who had been dating my brother briefly during one of his visits. She had never told me about their relationship because it had been so brief and she didn't want to make things awkward. But now she revealed that during their short time together, he had told her disturbing things about me. He had claimed I had a history of mental health issues, that I had been violent toward him as children, that our parents were worried about my stability but didn't know how to help me. He had positioned himself as the tragic brother who was burdened with caring for his troubled twin. This friend said something that made my blood run cold. She told me that my brother had seemed almost excited when he talked about my supposed problems, like he enjoyed having this secret knowledge about me. She had found it strange at the time how he seemed to relish sharing these intimate family secrets with someone he barely knew. As I gathered these testimonies, I realized that my brother's manipulation had been even more extensive than I had imagined. He hadn't just been reactive, responding to opportunities as they arose. He had been proactive, creating opportunities, planting stories, building a comprehensive alternate reality where I was the problem and he was the solution. I also discovered that his behavior had affected not just me, but other people in our lives. Several friends from high school told me they had always felt like they couldn't get close to me because they had heard I was unpredictable or had trust issues. They had wanted to be better friends, but my brother's stories had made them cautious around me. I realized I had lost out on countless relationships and opportunities because of his deliberate sabotage. The week before our birthday party, my brother started his usual routine of managing expectations about me. He called several family members to express concern about how I was handling turning 30, suggesting that I might be going through a difficult time and that everyone should be patient with me if I seemed off during the party. He was already laying the groundwork for me to be seen as unstable or emotional, probably anticipating that I might try to defend myself or challenge his narrative. But this time I was ready for him. I had spent months not just gathering evidence, but also working on my own emotional preparation. I had practiced staying calm under pressure, maintaining my composure even when provoked. I had learned techniques for presenting information clearly and factually without seeming emotional or defensive. I was determined that when I finally spoke my truth, no one would be able to dismiss me as the hysterical twin having a breakdown. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the years of silence, all the times I had swallowed my truth to keep the peace. I thought about the relationships I had lost, the opportunities that had been stolen from me, the pieces of myself that I had given up trying to be someone I wasn't. Tomorrow, I was going to change everything. Tomorrow, I was going to reclaim my story. My brother called me that night, ostensibly to talk about the party plans, but really to do his usual check-in to see how I was doing emotionally. He had this way of asking about my mental state that seemed caring but was actually gathering intelligence about how stable I was, how likely I was to cause problems for him. He asked if I was feeling overwhelmed about the party, if I needed him to help manage things so I wouldn't get stressed. Even after everything I had learned about him, his ability to sound genuinely concerned still amazed me. I told him I was fine, that I was actually looking forward to the party. There was something in my voice, a confidence that he wasn't used to hearing from me, and I could tell it made him nervous. He started probing more, asking if anything was bothering me, if there was anything I wanted to talk about before the party. I realized he was worried that I might be planning something that I might disrupt his carefully managed image. For the first time in my life, I had information that he didn't know I had. For the first time, I was the one with secrets, the one with a plan. It felt strange and powerful and terrifying all at once. I was about to blow up 30 years of carefully constructed lies, and I wasn't sure what would be left standing when the dust settled. Update 2. The day of our 30th birthday party arrived with perfect weather and all the fanfare our parents had planned. Our childhood home was decorated with photos from every stage of our lives, a timeline of the perfect twin siblings growing up together. Looking at those photos with my new understanding of our dynamic was surreal. In every picture, we looked happy and close, but now I could see the subtle ways he positioned himself, the way he always managed to be the focus even when we were supposed to be equal subjects. The guest list was extensive. Our parents had invited family members, family friends, neighbors, former teachers, college friends, and colleagues. It was basically a comprehensive collection of everyone who had been touched by my brother's narrative about us over the years. As people arrived and mingled, I watched the familiar dynamic play out. People would greet us both, but there was always this subtle difference in how they interacted with each of us. With him, they were warm and easy. With me, there was this underlying tone of careful politeness, like they were being kind to someone they had been told was fragile or difficult. My brother was in his element. He moved through the crowd like a natural politician, sharing stories, making people laugh, accepting congratulations on his recent achievements. Several people made comments about how proud they were of the man he had become, how he was such a good son and brother. Each compliment felt like a knife because I knew the truth about who he really was beneath the charming exterior. I had prepared for this moment for months, but as the party went on, I started to feel the familiar doubt creeping in. These people genuinely liked him. They saw him as a good person. Was I really going to destroy that image? Was I going to be the one who ruined our birthday party, who created family drama, who proved once again that I was the problematic twin? But then something happened that solidified my resolve. I overheard my brother talking to our cousin about me. He was expressing concern about my career situation, about how I seemed to be struggling to find my direction in life. He mentioned that he had tried to help me at our previous workplace, but that I had seemed resistant to guidance. He was painting a picture of himself as the supportive brother trying to help his struggling twin, and our cousin was eating it up, making sympathetic noises about how hard it must be for him to watch me stumble through life. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Here he was, at our birthday party, still actively undermining me, still managing people's perceptions to make himself look better at my expense. He couldn't even take one day off from his manipulation campaign. That's when I knew I had to act. I had originally planned to wait until the formal toast portion of the evening, but I realized that would give him too much opportunity to control the narrative, to position whatever I said as an emotional outburst from his unstable twin. Instead, I decided to approach key people individually, starting with family members who had the most influence over how others saw us. I started with our grandmother, the same one whose ceramic bird had been broken 30 years earlier. I sat down next to her and asked if she remembered that day. She did, vividly. She remembered how heartbroken she had been that her beloved granddaughter had broken something so precious to her. I told her gently that I hadn't broken the bird, that I hadn't even been in the room when it happened. I explained that I had been afraid to contradict the story at the time because I was 5 years old and confused, but that I had carried the guilt and shame of that moment for 25 years. My grandmother's face went through a series of emotions as she processed what I was telling her. She looked at me carefully, studying my face, and then she said something that almost made me cry. She said she had always wondered about that day because it had seemed so out of character for me. She said I had been such a gentle child and the violence of throwing something at the wall had never quite made sense to her, but she had trusted the eyewitness account. I told her there had been other incidents over the years, that there was a pattern of me being blamed for things I hadn't done. I didn't go into extensive detail, but I gave her enough information that she could start to see the bigger picture. My grandmother was a sharp woman, and I could see her mind working, connecting dots, remembering other incidents where the official story hadn't quite added up. Next, I approached my former high school teacher who had come to the party. I had always respected her, and I knew she had a good memory for her students. I asked her about the time I had supposedly cheated on a test, an incident that had resulted in me being suspended and having to retake the class during summer school. I told her I had never cheated, that I still didn't understand how it had happened. Her response was immediate and strong. She said she had never believed I had cheated, that it had gone against everything she knew about my character. She said the evidence had been circumstantial and strange, but that the administration had pressured her to go along with the punishment. She had always regretted not fighting harder for me. When I explained that my brother had been the one who knew about the test answers, who had access to my backpack, who had been helping me study, she nodded grimly. She said it made sense now that she had always suspected there was more to the story. As I continued these conversations, I could see a shift happening in the room. People were looking at me differently, but this time it wasn't with pity or caution. They were looking at me with recognition, like they were seeing me clearly for the first time. Several people approached me to share their own memories of incidents where they had always felt something was off about the official version of events. My college roommate pulled me aside to tell me about other things she had remembered since our previous conversation. She said that during my brother's visits, I would always become more anxious and withdrawn. She had attributed it to normal family stress at the time, but now she realized it was because I was walking on eggshells, afraid of what manipulation or sabotage might be coming next. But the most powerful moment came when our high school friend group started comparing notes. One of them mentioned how they had always felt like they couldn't quite trust me, that they had heard things about me being unreliable or having anger issues. But as they talked among themselves, they realized that all of these stories had come from the same source. Every negative thing they had heard about me had been shared by my brother, usually framed as concern for my well-being. Meanwhile, I could see my brother becoming increasingly agitated. He had noticed the shift in the room's energy, the way people were clustering around me instead of him. He tried to insert himself into conversations to redirect attention back to positive topics, but people kept bringing up these old incidents, these discrepancies in stories they had never questioned before. The real turning point came when our family doctor arrived at the party. He had been our pediatrician growing up and had remained close to our family. My brother made the mistake of approaching him with his usual routine of expressing concern about my mental health. But this time, instead of a receptive audience, he found someone who had been putting pieces together. The doctor told my brother that he had always been puzzled by the disconnect between what he was told about my behavior and what he observed during our appointments. He said that medically, I had shown no signs of the emotional or behavioral issues that were constantly being reported to him. He had sometimes wondered if there was something he was missing, some underlying condition that wasn't presenting clearly, but now he was beginning to suspect that the problem wasn't with his diagnosis skills. That's when my brother finally snapped. For 30 years, he had maintained perfect control over his image, never letting the mask slip, never showing the calculating manipulator underneath the charming exterior. But faced with the systematic dismantling of his carefully constructed narrative, he lost his composure for the first time in his life. He started arguing with the doctor, insisting that I had always been problematic, that everyone was misremembering things, that I was manipulating people just like I had always done. But his tone was wrong, his demeanor was wrong. People could see the aggression and desperation that he had always kept hidden. The contrast between his usual charming self and this angry, defensive version was stark and unsettling. Someone asked him directly why he thought so many people were suddenly remembering things differently. Instead of giving a reasonable answer, he launched into a tirade about how I had always been jealous of him, how I was trying to ruin his reputation because I couldn't accept that he was more successful, more liked, more everything than I was. The narcissism and cruelty in his voice was unmistakable. Our parents, who had been watching this unfold with growing horror, finally stepped in. They pulled us both aside, away from the guests, and demanded to know what was happening. For the first time in 30 years, I told them the complete truth about our dynamic, about the systematic manipulation and sabotage, about the evidence I had gathered and the people I had spoken to. My mother started crying. She said she had sometimes had doubts about the stories she heard about me, that they had never quite matched the daughter she knew in private moments. She said there had been times when she had wondered if she was failing as a mother, if she was missing something important about my struggles, because the problems everyone told her about never seemed to manifest when it was just the two of us. My father was angry, but his anger was directed at my brother. He said he felt like he had failed as a parent, that he had allowed one child to systematically abuse the other without recognizing what was happening. He said he was ashamed that he had been so easily manipulated, that he had participated in the very system that had hurt me. Final update. The aftermath of our 30th birthday party was swift and dramatic. Word spread quickly through our social circle about what had been revealed, and the response was overwhelming. People reached out to me with apologies, with their own memories of incidents that now made sense, with support and validation that I had never expected to receive. My brother's reputation crumbled almost overnight. It turned out that once people started looking at his behavior with clear eyes, they could see patterns they had missed before. Several colleagues came forward to share their own experiences of his subtle manipulation tactics at work. His ex-girlfriends began comparing notes and realized that he had told each of them disparaging stories about the others, creating drama and insecurity that benefited him. The most shocking revelation came from our parents' investigation into our childhood incidents. They went through old school records, contacted former teachers and administrators, and discovered a trail of evidence that supported my version of events. Report cards with teacher comments that contradicted the official family narratives. Incident reports that had been filed but never shared with them. Medical records that showed no signs of the behavioral or emotional problems that had supposedly plagued my childhood. My mother found a journal she had kept during our early years, and reading through it with new awareness was devastating for her. She could see in her own words how she had been gradually convinced to see me as the problematic child, how her natural instincts about my character had been slowly eroded by consistent messaging from my brother. She found entries where she had written about being confused by my behavior, questioning whether she understood me at all because what she was told about me was so different from what she experienced directly. The professional consequences for my brother were severe. His workplace conducted an investigation after several colleagues came forward with complaints about his manipulative behavior. They discovered that he had been systematically undermining other employees, spreading rumors, and creating a toxic work environment while maintaining a facade of being helpful and supportive. He was terminated within 2 weeks of our birthday party. His personal relationships disintegrated as well. Once people understood his pattern of manipulation, they began to recognize it in their own interactions with him. Friends distanced themselves, his romantic relationship ended, and he found himself increasingly isolated as his reputation preceded him in social situations. My parents struggled with enormous guilt over what had happened. They entered family counseling to work through their feelings about having failed to protect me, about having been complicit in my abuse. The hardest part for them was realizing that their desire to be fair and loving parents had been weaponized against both me and them. They had been trying so hard to address what they believed were my behavioral issues that they had never questioned whether those issues actually existed. For me, the validation was both healing and overwhelming. After 30 years of believing that there was something fundamentally wrong with me, discovering that I was actually a perfectly normal person who had been systematically gaslit was disorienting. I had to relearn how to trust my own perceptions, my own memories, my own judgment. It was like waking up from a nightmare that had lasted my entire life. I started rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by my brother's manipulation. Old friends reached out to apologize for believing stories about me, for keeping their distance based on false information. I began dating again, this time with confidence in my own worth instead of the constant fear that someone would discover how allegedly difficult I was to love. The career opportunities that had been stolen from me couldn't be recovered, but new ones opened up as people in my professional network began to see me clearly. I was offered positions that would have been unthinkable when I was carrying the reputation my brother had built for me. I discovered that I was actually quite good at my job when I wasn't being sabotaged from within. My brother attempted to reach out to me several times in the months following the party. His messages followed a predictable pattern: first denial, then minimization, then attempts to shift blame, and finally promises to change if I would just give him another chance. But I had learned too much about manipulation tactics to fall for any of it. I could see through every technique he used, every emotional appeal he made. The most telling thing about his attempts at reconciliation was that he never actually acknowledged the specific harm he had caused. His apologies were always vague, focused on how sorry he was that I felt hurt rather than taking responsibility for his deliberate actions. He wanted forgiveness and restored relationship without actually changing his fundamental approach to interpersonal dynamics. I chose to go no contact with him permanently. This was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made because despite everything he had done, he was still my twin brother. We had shared 30 years of life, and there were genuine moments of connection buried beneath all the manipulation. But I realized that maintaining any relationship with him would require me to pretend that the abuse hadn't happened, to go back to accepting his version of reality, and I couldn't do that anymore. My parents respected my decision, though it broke their hearts. They continued to have a relationship with him, but it was fundamentally changed. They no longer trusted his version of events, no longer automatically believed his stories, no longer treated him as the reliable narrator of family dynamics. This loss of his primary enablers was perhaps the most devastating consequence for him. The ripple effects of exposing his behavior extended far beyond our immediate family. Other people in our community began to examine their own relationships, looking for signs of similar manipulation. Several people reached out to thank me for speaking up, saying that my courage had helped them recognize unhealthy patterns in their own lives. I also heard from other twins who had experienced similar dynamics, who had been trapped in relationships where one twin was elevated at the expense of the other. It was both heartbreaking and validating to learn that this wasn't an isolated phenomenon, that there were others who understood the unique pain of being systematically undermined by the person who was supposed to be your closest ally. Today, 2 years after our 30th birthday party, my life is completely different. I have healthy relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I have a career that utilizes my actual skills and abilities rather than being limited by an artificial reputation. I have a sense of self that is based on my own experiences and choices rather than someone else's narrative about who I am. The trauma of those 30 years will probably always be with me in some way. I still sometimes catch myself second-guessing my own perceptions, still sometimes feel surprised when people genuinely like me without any manipulation required. But I've learned to recognize these moments for what they are, echoes of old programming that no longer serves me. I've also learned to trust my instincts about people in ways I never could before. Having survived such extensive manipulation, I've developed a keen sense for when someone is trying to manage my perceptions or control my behavior. This has been invaluable in building new relationships and protecting myself from similar dynamics. The most unexpected gift from this entire experience has been the relationship I've developed with my parents. Once the artificial tension created by my brother's manipulation was removed, we were able to connect in ways we never had before. They could finally see me clearly, and I could finally trust that their love for me was based on who I actually am rather than who they had been told I was. My brother's life has taken a very different trajectory. Last I heard, he had moved to another state, presumably to start over where his reputation hadn't preceded him. I sometimes wonder if he's learned anything from losing everything, if he's developed any genuine insight into the harm he caused. But mostly, I try not to think about him at all. I've built a new life based on truth instead of lies, on genuine connection instead of manipulation, on my own worth instead of artificial comparisons. It took 30 years to escape the web he had woven around me, but once I was free, I discovered that the person I actually am is someone worth knowing, worth loving, worth celebrating. The 7 minutes that separated our births turned out to be meaningless in the end. What mattered was the 30 years it took me to reclaim my own story, to expose his lies, and to finally become the person I was always meant to be. And that person is pretty amazing, even if it took me 3 decades to figure that out.